So today we'll be starting our discussion of chapter 29 by talking about the Great War. And this is the years of 1914 to 1918. Now there's several factors that led up to this. This conflict that devastated Europe had a major impact on the world. So today we'll be talking about marching toward war. We'll get into Europe's involvement and then how it became a global conflict, and then how the failure to make peace eventually led to another 100 years of conflict. So let's start by talking about section 1, the rising tensions in Europe. And so to begin, I want to recap what nationalism means. Nationalism is a deep devotion to one's nation. It's when you hear the national anthem and someone sings it quite beautifully and you get chills. That's nationalism. It's when you have an active service member who's part of your family and they lose their life in combat, and you put a flag in your window or a golden star. It's when you attend a funeral of a veteran and a service member shows up to that funeral to hand you a folded flag. Those are all symbols of nationalism. Not just in regards to military, but military and nationalism are often very closely tied. Now, through the late 1800s, Europe had enjoyed a period of peace, but there were some big problems, ones that we've been learning about. Oh my gosh, like Germany had finally formalized by the mid-1800s. They did so by declaring war on France and by conquering territory. France had formalized, but they had had their problems we've talked about with the religious conflicts between the Protestant Revolution, the Huguenots, the Catholics, and of course we learned the same in Great Britain, and how all of these different ethnic and religious tensions have often been suppressed violently. But how many leaders saw, especially after the Napoleonic Wars, that nationalism would be an answer to preventing future aggression. Basically, that if we have these strong national governments, they can maintain order. Now, the problem with that theory is, when John Locke wrote that people have the right to determine their own destiny, the people have the right to pick their own squad. Well, people started picking their own squads. And the fact is that we don't all want to be on the same team. Certainly not when we get to pick our teams. And we go back to many of those same ethnic and religious rivalries, particularly in a part of the world called the Balkans. Now, the next kind of major trend that I want to briefly unpack is imperialism. And we've been talking about this a lot lately. Imperialism is the quest for colonies. All the way back to that theory of mercantilism, that if I want to keep my people safe, I need to be strong. If I want to be strong, I need to be wealthy. If I want to be wealthy, well, I'm going to need markets for my products and sources of materials. Where can I get those things? Well, I'm going to need plantations with large labor forces. Where am I going to put them? In tropical areas. Wait, my country is not in a tropical area. Well, I need a tropical area. So I need to acquire property in these places. I also need to promote stability in those places. Ergo, I'm going to conquer those places. Which in theory goes back to that idea of promoting national security. However, this led us to a practice of colonizing and imperializing and building these mega nations. To the point where by 1914, Britain has an empire that goes all the way around the world. And France and Germany and Austria and Russia are all trying to do the same thing. Now, this gets further complicated when these same nations are fighting over colonial possessions. And so because there's always this competition to be the biggest and the strongest in preparation for a possible war, that's another trend called militarism. That means if you go to prison, you better work out. But guess what? Og the caveman is working out harder than you. You don't want him to squash your head, because he can. So you better work out twice as hard. Well, suddenly the two of you have grown mega huge. Well, then what? What if suddenly he steals your cornbread? Why? Because he can? Because he can. Because deep down he realizes if he doesn't show aggressive action, you might eventually. And so it's safer for him to be the aggressor than to get attacked when he's not looking. And so in his self-defense, he's going to get you. Well, you also realize that in the back of your mind that Og the caveman's going to steal your cornbread. So what are you going to do? Well, in the interest of your self-defense, you have to be the aggressor. You're going to go up and kick him in the shin. Why? Because you can. Because in the interest of your self-defense, Og the caveman is potentially stronger than you, which threatens ultimately your safety. Now, again, if you take that to a larger scale, you've got France, you've got Germany. They're both working out pretty hard. They both realize that aggression might be in the interest of their national security. Now it's just a matter of who does it first. This is what we call a powder keg, meaning that you would never know who Archduke Franz Ferdinand is if France and Germany hadn't been working out so hard. You know, this is like the little guy in the prison. You know, little guy that gets the lunch for Og the caveman. You know, so you see little guy that gets the lunch for Og the caveman, boom, you knock him down, steal the cornbread. Poor little guy, nobody knows his name. He would have just served out the rest of his time and been fine. But no, somebody went after a little guy, and that started the fight between the two big guys. It's an arms race between these nations that are growing ever more powerful.
Beloved friends, this is what we must do. Strike with all our power. Give every ounce of strength to win victory before the end of the year. It is with reluctance that I bring this subject up again. You are the life of the fatherland, you boys. You are the iron men of Germany. You are the gay heroes who will repulse the enemy when you are called upon to do so. It is not for me to suggest that any of you should stand up and offer to defend his country, but I wonder if such a thing is going through your heads. I know that in one of the schools, the boys have risen up in the classroom and enlisted in a mass. And of course, if such a thing should happen here, you would not blame me for a feeling of pride. Perhaps some will say that you should not be allowed to go yet, that you are too young, that you have homes, mothers, fathers, that you should not be torn away? Are your fathers so forgetful of their fatherland that they would let it perish rather than you? Are your mothers so weak that they cannot send a son to defend the land which gave them birth? And after all, is a little experience such a bad thing for a boy? Is the honor of wearing a uniform something from which we should run? And if our young ladies glory in those who wear it, is that anything to be ashamed of? I know you have never desired the adulation of heroes. That has not been part of my teaching. We have sought to make ourselves worthy, and let acclaim come when it would. But to be foremost in battle is a virtue, not to be.
Now, Germany was formalized as a nation when their leader Otto von Bismarck worked to keep peace in Europe after their victory in the Franco-Prussian War. But he also believed that France would seek ultimate revenge for the territories that Germany had taken from them. So again, back to the analogy of the two guys working out. I mean, Germany is maybe the stronger of the two, but they realize that ultimately France is a force to be reckoned with. And the German leaders begin to think that, well, how are we going to stop this? And so, in an attempt at diplomacy, the Germans seek to isolate France, meaning, okay, they have another buddy who works out all the time. And so if France attacks them, well, now it's not just messing with them, but their other buddy. And so Germany made a series of treaties and alliances. Most importantly, with Austria-Hungary, with Italy, and then later the Ottoman Empire. And this peace made a triple entente, a triple alliance, meaning that an attack on any one of those nations would be seen as an attack on all of those nations. So France wouldn't mess with Germany if they knew they were also messing with these other places, in theory. And so Bismarck got to retire in a degree of relative peace. Meanwhile, France is growing concerned because now they realize that Germany's not just working out hard, but they've got big, beefy friends. They've squatted up. Well, what should France do? I mean, it's not rocket science here. What are they going to do? Well, they're going to call up their big, beefy friends. And they're going to squat up too. And before you know it, you've got two motorcycle gangs in the same prison, and I'm telling you, it's not a good recipe. So, Britain, France, and Russia form their own alliance called the Triple Entente, or the Triple Intention, meaning they have the same goal. And that goal is that an attack on Britain, France, or Russia would be considered an attack on all of them. And so you really have these two rival camps, which is not a good situation, folks. And so now you've got these two rival motorcycle gangs, which, oh man, we're talking about a tense standoff. There was a case in the labor movement where there was a standoff between the strikers and the National Guard. And a fight started because some kids on a roof started throwing rocks. Yeah, not a good idea. And one of those rocks hit and killed someone. And that sparked a fight that killed dozens. I couldn't tell you who the kids on the rocks are. I don't know if anybody even knows their names. It's not important. I couldn't tell you the first person that died in that fight. It's probably written down somewhere. But what's important is that it was so tense that all it took was that one little thing. And that's the situation that we're in Europe, leading up to this crisis in the Balkans. Now, the Balkans are what was formerly the Greek states. So it's ironic that, we were talking so much about the Peloponnesian War and the great civil war between Athens and Sparta. And here we are again back to this region. Man, what is up with this place? You see, many of the regions of the Balkans had recently won their independence in the early 1900s. And we've also learned the trend that what happens to new baby countries is not always a good thing. And so there was this new group called the Serbs. And they began calling themselves Serbia because they've newly won their freedom. That is, until Austria-Hungary, the big powerful empire allied with the Germans, annexed this area or conquered it. And the Serbians resented this. They saw themselves as conquered people. What are they going to do against, the evil empire? Well, what did Luke Skywalker do? Did he just say, "Oh man, I've been conquered. I better make friends with Darth Vader"? I don't think that's how it worked, right? No, they said, "Oh man, I've been conquered. I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to put a stop to that." In fact, the Serbians formed a secret group called the Black Hand. And this secret group, if you're into conspiracy stuff, these are some of the scariest. They're responsible for the deaths of many people in the late 1800s and early 1900s. In fact, they're the ones who would send, and maybe you've heard of this, a piece of paper with a black dot. And if you received the piece of paper with a black dot, it meant that the Black Hand was going to come and kill you. And they were just cocky enough to send you the black dot ahead of time because they knew they would go through with it. Now, the leader of Austria had received many death threats. But what do you do if you're a powerful country seeking to rule over a weaker one? Well, you got to show them that you're the more powerful country. And so how do you do that? How do you do that without just starting to blow up things? Well, one way you do that is you march your army through their biggest city just to show them how big your army is. And you put one of your important people at the head of the army to say, "Look how big my army is. What you going to do about it?" It's really just a taunt. Well, guess what? The Black Hand found the leader of that army on that parade through the city of Sarajevo, and they had stationed assassins at every corner. And each one had vowed to kill the Archduke if the opportunity arose. And the young man named Gavrilo Princip saw his opportunity, walked up to the Archduke, point blank, shot he and his wife on their carriage. And this sparked a crisis. Little tiny Serbia committing a murder sparked a global conflict that led to 100 years of fighting. It's hard to really wrap my head around. But it all started with that one action. Because when Austria replied with an ultimatum saying, "We're going to declare martial law. Those same troops that you saw marching through your cities are now going to be on your street corners. We're going to conduct a nationwide investigation. We're going to eradicate the Black Hand." Which, by the way, is exactly what the United States did after 9/11. What did Serbia do? They responded by calling up their ally, who, by the way, was Russia. Who, by the way, was allied with France. Who was also allied with Britain. Now, What's Austria going to do? Well, the other team just squatted up against them, right? Well, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to call up their biggest and baddest. Their northern neighbor, Germany, had signed an alliance with them. Yeah, of course we got you. But, if you've watched Sons of Anarchy, people aren't helping each other out of the kindness of their heart. They have their own motives. Germany was really just waiting for this opportunity. And, of course, they call up the Ottoman Empire, too, who just happened to be allied with them. And then before you know it, this isolated incident in a city in the Balkans became a global conflict.